Okay, so moving on to the intestinal microbiota, there are basically two categories for the makeup of these bacteria. So you're going to have either your potentially pathogenic or those bacteria that are more health-promoting. Now, the potentially pathogenic bacteria can contribute to infection, various toxin formations, and even the longer and the higher the level of the bacteria that remain in our bodies have the opportunity for more interactions to actually produce carcinogenic substances. Whereas from a health-promoting standpoint, this is where we're fermenting those soluble fibers, and the key here is that these unique bacteria that are present in our GI tract prefer these short-chain soluble fibers, also being only those that are more potentially health-promoting. And also we have the opportunity to see an environment that's going to be more unfavorable for those potentially harmful bacteria. So really it comes down to balancing the potentially pathogenic bacteria with those that are more health-promoting. So how is it that we may not have a good balance between the good bacteria and those that are more potentially pathogenic? Well, unfortunately, certainly our bodies have many ways in which we can keep everything in balance, but when we start to look at certain factors like diet, for example, diet can actually play a significant role in disrupting that balance depending on how we eat. Another area that's been thoroughly investigated is the use of antibiotics. Unfortunately, we are very quick to provide antibiotics or recommend antibiotics just to address if there's an illness or even without testing to see what the particular bacteria might be, or to do a culture. We may just say for safety purposes, let's just put you on an antibiotic, and that should cover a broad range of bacteria to protect you. But unfortunately, not only does it get rid of or kill those offending potentially pathogenic bacteria, but it also disrupts and kills some of the good bacteria. And there's also environmental changes that can disrupt this balance. Certainly pollution, anything that you inhale can also disrupt the environment. And then last but certainly not least, age is another factor. And it's interesting, there's data that supports that as we age, typically around the age of 55, in the elderly population, if you were to examine the fecal flora, you'll find a much higher concentration of the more potentially pathogenic bacteria like Clostridiums versus the bifidogenic bacteria. And so the question is it age alone, or is it the fact that by the time you have reached the age of 55, diet has had plenty of time to play a role? Is it possible that you've been on various medications or antibiotics that have disrupted this balance? And, of course, the environment that you live in. By that time, you've seen the effects that maybe aren't so beneficial as these outside factors that could disrupt the equilibrium. So, again, discussing FLS and inulin, safety and tolerance are certainly going to be some of the key areas that we have to focus on. And I'm not going to go through all of these studies, but I just wanted to identify that we do have several reports available, especially with infants, in Japan, and as well as just in Europe in general. They've been very aggressive to include prebiotics in infant formulas, infant cereals, in their diet. And the safety of these prebiotics has been well demonstrated. There have been no adverse effects, and on average, you see typically up to 3 grams a day. And you'll see that this starts from as young as birth, well within their first year, and then even through their toddler years, where they are adding these prebiotics to their diet to help support an overall healthy GI tract. We also have studies with children, and again, looking at children that even with cancer, so certainly children we think about as a more fragile population, but even those with cancer, there have been studies to just look at whether or not the use of prebiotics were safe, were there any adverse effects. And Zhang as well as Hussey have both looked at children providing diets or formulas that contain prebiotics, so either with or without prebiotics, again showing very good tolerance, and actually showing a statistically significant increase in the amount of bifidogenic bacteria with utilizing these certain food ingredients. So again, just to show you that we do have studies available to support that these prebiotics not only are safe for infants and children, and then last but not least, we have a slide here that addresses those studies, and this is just a few studies or reviews that address the adults as well. Again, there's going to be various ranges of FOS and or inulin intake, and looking at tolerance, you can see there's anywhere from 10 grams a day, even up to 40 grams a day, which is extremely high. And I will say that typically when reviewing these studies, the outcomes tend to show noticeable side effects, and those side effects, as you probably could guess, would be gas or flatulence, tend to be as you get over that 15 gram to 20 gram per day amount of these prebiotics. And again, it's going to vary from one individual to another, but certainly if we compare the Buddington study, where we can see perhaps as little as 4 grams a day can show an increase in the bifidogenic bacteria, up to studies that are using 40 grams a day. It's just trying to find that happy medium where everybody is happy as far as tolerating the addition of the prebiotics, and we see an increase of the good bacteria. In some of the areas within prebiotics, of course, bowel management. We always think about bowel management with fibers. And again, just reviewing briefly here, we see that with the release of these short-chain fatty acids, they actually, as they're absorbed, pull in water and electrolytes. And so that could be very important and beneficial for that patient who has diarrhea. Also, we're feeding those colonocytes, and we want to make sure that those cells within our colon are as healthy and intact as they possibly can be, so that the fluids that are traveling through have the maximal opportunity to be absorbed. And certainly what we'd like to do, because a lot of times diarrhea could be from an overgrowth of the more detrimental bacteria, is the more beneficial bacteria we have, the least or less opportunity for those pathogenic bacteria to adhere to the mucosal lining. We've also seen some studies looking at the role of constipation. Again, going back to the role with butyrate, we've seen that it helps to increase or stimulate intestinal peristalsis and actually increase fecal moisture. So again, there are many potential benefits of using prebiotics for individuals that not only have diarrhea but are also experiencing constipation. Another area, just again, as I've mentioned, is just overall gut integrity. So I won't spend a lot of time on this, but just to again identify that there are patient populations, those individuals that do have a compromised GI tract do and can benefit from the role or the addition of prebiotics. And certainly we want to maintain integrity. We want to make sure that those ileal and colonic cells are proliferating, and certainly with the differentiation, this can actually help enhance intestinal healing and again increase motility. And ultimately what we want to do is to preserve the integrity and minimize the opportunity for bacterial translocation, because once we have those potentially pathogenic bacteria in circulation, that easily can lead to sepsis, and ultimately, especially in our very critically ill patients that are at risk, because a lot of times they may not have been fed for several days, so they may already have the start of GI atrophy, puts them at much greater risk for bacterial translocation, ending up with sepsis, and again, ultimately multiple organ failure. So, of course, we know that that would be very detrimental.